Welcome back to our channel Sastik Tune. Let's start today with Oliver Twist, Chapter 2. Life with Mr. Sowerberry. For a week, Oliver stayed alone in the cold, dark cellar, and it was the worst week of his life so far. Every morning, Mr. Bumble unlocked the door, took Oliver into the room where the boys were eating, and beat him, while the boys watched. Then he locked Oliver in the room again. Poor Oliver cried all day and at night. He couldn't sleep because he was cold, unhappy, and hungry. One morning, at the end of that week, Mr. Bumble saw Mr. Sowerberry, the coffin maker, outside the workhouse. Mr. Sowerberry was a tall, thin man who always wore black clothes because of his job. He often came to the workhouse because so many poor people died there, and so he knew Mr. Bumble well. The two men began to chat, and then Mr. Bumble pointed to the notice on the workhouse door. "Mr. Sowerberry, do you know anyone who wants a boy and 5 pounds? Mr. Sowerberry thought for a few moments. "I think I will take him, Mr. Bumble. I need a boy to work in my shop." They went inside to make the arrangements. That evening, Mr. Bumble unlocked the cellar door and told Oliver the news. Oliver said nothing. He just pulled the cap down over his eyes to hide his tears and followed Mr. Bumble through the streets to the coffin maker's shop. Mr. Sowerberry was waiting for them. There was only the light from one small candle, so the room was dark and gloomy. A finished coffin lay on a table in the middle of the room, and pieces of wood stood against the walls. Mr. Sowerberry smiled at Oliver and then called his wife. "Mrs. Sowerberry, will you come here for a moment, my dear?" Mrs. Sowerberry was a small, thin woman with an angry face. Oliver thought she looked like a fox. She looked at him, and Oliver bowed politely. He's small," she said at last. "Yes, he is small, but he will grow, ma'am," said Mr. Bumble. "Oh, yes, he will grow all right. On our food and drink. Get downstairs, you little bag of bones." She pushed Oliver down some stairs into a dark little kitchen where a servant girl was working. "Charlotte, give this boy those bits of meat the dog didn't eat." For the first time in his life, Oliver tasted meat. He ate the dog's food hungrily, and then Mrs. Sowerberry said, "Here's paid under the shop counter. There's nowhere else, so enjoy sleeping in there with the coffins." She laughed and left Oliver alone. He was frightened and hardly slept all night. Early in the morning, Oliver heard someone kicking the door and shouting, "Open the door!" Oliver opened the door, and a big boy walked into the shop. "I'm Mr. Noah Claypole, and you must do what I tell you," said the boy. "Now take the shutters down and hurry up." He kicked Oliver as he walked past. The work was hard, but Mr. Sowerberry was kind to Oliver. When Noah noticed this, he got jealous. He was always nasty to Oliver and made his life very difficult. One day, the two boys were in the kitchen together. Noah wanted to make Oliver cry. He pulled his hair, pinched his ears, and said all the horrible things he could think of, But Oliver didn't cry. "How's your mother?" asked Noah. "She is dead." Noah thought Oliver was ready to cry, so he continued, "I heard your mother was a bad woman." Oliver's face went red and he jumped to his feet and hit Noah so hard that the big boy fell down. Noah began to shout, "Charlotte! Mrs. Sorbury, help! Oliver's murdering me!" The two women ran into the kitchen and they both hit Oliver. Charlotte locked him in the coal cellar until Mr. Sorbury came home. When Mrs. Sorbury told him what happened, he beat Oliver too and sent him to bed without any supper. Alone with the gloomy coffins, Oliver burst into tears. He cried for a long time, but at last he had an idea and wiped his eyes. He decided to run away to London and look for work there. As soon as it was light, he took all the things he owned, a shirt, 2 pairs of socks, a piece of bread and a penny, and tied them up in a big handkerchief. Then he quietly opened the door and set off. Here our chapter 2 ends.